Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. Today I'd like to welcome Michael Martin to the show. Michael, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Raj. Thanks for having me along.
Thank you for being on. Michael, I'd like to kick off the show with something interesting from the guest. So please tell the audience something interesting about yourself.
Of course. I've been high in the Himalayas twice in my life. Trekking, travel's always been a big part of my life, and I've done two solo treks in the Nepal Himalaya that were really magical to the extent that I think of them all the time, pretty much on a daily basis. They stick with me as wonder experiences I've had in my life in many ways, but especially the human interactions of people super far away from a very different background and live in a very different world, and the massive power of nature when you're in a place like that. So I don't meet many people that have been trekking up in Nepal by themselves.
That's pretty amazing. How long ago was this?
I like to say on my first retirement when I was young and 29, because I quit my job and took off, 3-4 months, and that was part of it. And then I went back for a birthday 8 years ago. And so one quite a while ago and one much more recent.
So I've seen the Himalayas from the Indian side. I've been up to Shimla, which is one of the highest points on the North Indian side. And from there, I think they're called the Gurkhas, the tour guides, the people that live up in the mountains, pointed out the Himalayas to us from there. So that was my experience, actually just seeing them, but nowhere close to where you experienced.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful people and beautiful surroundings.
It's really amazing. And I was speaking to a friend recently about nature. And, when you get up really close to nature, it's only then that you realize, irrelevance and relevance of us as human beings compared to nature.
Exactly. And that's my point about the massive power of nature. I've never experienced anything like that there, because you're very small and it's very large and overwhelming as far as the eye can see. So it's a lot of learning in that experience. So I was glad for that.
In a similar vein, I had a conversation recently with somebody that lived in the Bay Area, and they were saying that they feel like people that live on the coast near the oceans are more relaxed because they get the opportunity to look out on the water every day, and the water goes to the horizon, and they know every day that, again, how small we are compared to the amount of water in the world.
Sure. No, I can see that, having spent enough time at the water's edge of the ocean, and so it's an interesting thought. It makes sense to me. I agree.
So, Michael, rather than me going into your bio, I've seen that you've been in the solar industry for longer than many of the people that I've spoken to. Can you give me some background onto what got you involved and what you've seen change over the years?
Be happy to. Yes. So I'm living proof of someone that can do a career change well into career number one. So I was software IT, business development, sales, and marketing guy for a couple of decades, and which was wonderful. But I came to get more in touch with working for purpose and impact, is the short version of that. And that was influenced by a lot of things, just growing up and getting more mature, having more experiences. And I just learned that I need that. And it also ties into, the more I was a dad and raising 4 girls. And I also am very motivated by the fact that our air could improve a lot. And the good thing about solar is that it definitely helps clean up our planet. So that's the motivation for me. And it's super fun. It's early. It's got so much upside. It's all those things that motivate me on a regular basis. And being in solar now for 8+ years has been very exciting because of the major transformation going on within the industry and within the marketplace that I've experienced so far. I know that there's lots more of that will continue to happen in the coming years and decades, actually.
Well, first, a brief side note. You have 4 daughters.
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 daughters. And that's one of the reasons why I've fallen in love with what Nexus PMG is doing. But going back to the solar, so what are some of the major changes you've seen happen in the past 30 years?
Well, the fact that people know how to spell solar now, so to speak, you know what I mean? It's not the word, it's just to know what it means.
Right.
And, it's now more or less in the mainstream business and more broad conversation for people. Here in North Texas, it's maybe not as much as it is in uh, Germany or Hawaii or the West Coast or New York or other places where there's been a lot more implementation. But it's exciting to see now that it's not a real outlier of a concept or an outlier of a solution to provide clean power, and so that's motivating for me. Just the general awareness, the popularity of solar is also enormous by independent third parties like Pew Research who do these things and find that like 90% of Americans like solar. They can't tell you much about it, but they like it, and I think part of that is because it's not a solution or a technology or an industry where you have a lot of disaster stories or danger or toxicity, or it's technology that's helps create electricity. It's brilliant. It's like computing technology where it's pretty benign in terms of its usefulness and how it's used. So that's again another motivating factor that it's renewable, as of course we all know it falls in the renewable domain, and clean. Uh,
True.
and the So that's for me the big thing. And another very interesting thing, and I think has a huge impact for the long term on the health and peace and prosperity of the planet, is that there is significant deployment of solar in the developing world. There are still 1.5 to 2 billion people that do not have electricity, and the answer to that, not exclusively, but a large part of that is solar because it scales. It can be small, one panel on a hut somewhere very remote, or you can cover acres and miles, square miles of land to provide clean power, and you don't need to connect to the grid. It's like the cell phone adoption everywhere in the world, skipping landlines. Same thing happening here. Power will make a massive impact on the quality of life, standard of living, healthcare, education of all these other communities too. So I'm not involved in that now, but I hope to spend some portion of my solar career also serving in the developing world, because that's really exciting what's happening there. And as a traveler, it would blend some things for me.
Well, you can mix business and pleasure.
Exactly.
Now you mentioned the education piece, and people are more aware of it. What are some of the hurdles you're seeing from stopping people or stopping cities, municipalities engaging in solar?
Sure. Most of it, I would say, is real simple and it's very overcomable, which is good, which is just education and awareness of the realities of where solar is in terms of its cost effectiveness, its return on investment, the value it provides. So I find pretty much on a daily basis that the assumption by people, because they're busy and whatever they do, they're not necessarily up to speed on the fact that, again, like computing technology, where I lived through this better, faster, cheaper experience and Moore's laws for decades, that the same thing's happening here with solar. So the economics pretty much work all across the US now for deploying solar power. And so that's really exciting, but most people don't know that. And here in North Texas, a big concern is, what about our hailstorms? How durable is it? Does it last? So again, the testing and the way solar modules are tested in labs and then perform in the field is well proven now. So that's exciting. But those are the things people need to be brought up to speed on, because then if the stuff lasts and it works, and if the numbers work, then I think as that education gets deeper into our community here and everywhere else where there's not a lot of penetration yet, then it's going to be like, holy cow, why don't we do this? And then you'll see people wanting to follow those leaders that start, and it'll become accepted and keeping up with the Joneses, whatever expression you'd like to use. So I'm very hopeful about that's where we're going. So I spend a lot of my time every day, every week, just trying to educate and inform people and advocate and bring them up to speed. And then we can maybe get into a conversation about how their organizations, their homes, whatever, can take advantage of the inherent value of solar power.
I almost feel like after listening to you talk, we need almost like neighborhood watch. We need neighborhood evangelists evangelizing solar.
Well, I'm sure my neighbors would tell you I probably act that way sometimes. So sure, let's do that in all of our neighborhood associations. Great idea. Let's push that out as a best
Or
practice.
even perhaps seeding it a different route would be going through the schools and having the kids come home and ask parents about solar.
Well, that to me is super exciting, and where I also have much hope, because I've again, as I mentioned, have these 4 kids. They're pretty much all out of school locally, but I've watched them go through it. The education around climate matters, the environment, pollution, waste, all these things. It's amazing how schools are doing a great job, I think, getting kids to where their thought process, their normal is, gee, shouldn't we recycle that? Gee, shouldn't we use less of that? Or why don't we walk or ride our bikes or not go somewhere? And why don't we carpool? Schools encourage that. So I'm very encouraged by how this is getting seeded early in kids now. So that's good. And once they become decision makers and have the ability to make things happen, then we can see a lot of these things perhaps accelerate, such as solar technology adoption.
Well, you mentioned decision makers, and I know my eldest daughter, who's 11, she had she was in a Destination Imagination event earlier this year, and it was around recycling plastic bags, and we had this whole plastic bag drive, and now we're extremely conscientious about using reusable bags, or if we do go to the grocery store, if we forget, we try to minimize the number of plastic bags we bring home, because she brought home all these statistics about animals eating plastic bags, ingesting them, and then ultimately how much plastic we're ingesting. So,
Yes.
to your point about, seeding the next generation, I think our kids are already asking better questions than we've ever asked regarding the environment.
Exactly right. And so I'm in this little niche of solar, which is going to have its impact, and I'm focused, but everything you just mentioned is kind of tangential to what I do and what motivates me as a sustainability geek, as an environmentalist that I've learned that I am, just my nature. And all those things matter. There's so many things like that are low hanging fruit, like take a shopping bag every time you shop, leave it in your trunk. It's an easy habit to form. And it's funny that your sixth grader is getting that. And my final high schooler right now as a senior is doing an environmental project right now that has to do with the impact of the meat industry and raising all these kinds of terrestrial foods, animals and meat that are super impactful on the climate. So it's great to hear, however many grades apart that is, 6 grades apart, different levels perhaps, but it's happening up and down the school system from kindergarten through seniors, obviously into college. Then when you get really serious education going, where they're going to jump right into careers, like my oldest daughter, who's involved in the sustainability world and conservation out in California. So yeah, it's that again. That's one of the things that keeps me going every day.
The grocery bag thing kind of tickles me a little bit. I grew up in London, let's say 30 years ago, and back then we were all using cloth bags anyway. Plastic bags weren't prevalent back in London at that time, and now it's almost like we're going full circle.
That's super interesting because of my love for travel, as you mentioned, and my youthful travel and earlier in life travel in other parts of the world. If you didn't have a bag at a store, you hopefully could carry everything with your hands because they didn't have bags. So that's just
Right.
the brilliance of America in many ways. Merchandising convenience, of course, we're always going to lead on that. And unfortunately, it's led to this proliferation of bags. But I think that awareness as well is growing, and that's going to change too. But that's a great example. I can relate to that one.
And when you talk about awareness and the environment, I can honestly tell you, I've never met a person that's told me, Raj, I hate the environment. I don't care for the environment. I've always heard that, perhaps activities or things are inconvenient to do. So I think the more we can make things convenient, the easier that transition is going to be.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And you're right. I always joke with people. I said, "Who here doesn't like to breathe?" And no hands go up, right? And who here doesn't like to breathe clean air? And again, that's a better place to have conversations, I think, on things that are just super simple that everybody does like, which is clean air, clean water, clean lands. Because we want to play out there, we want to have quality of sources for our food and our water and what we breathe, because you can't avoid it. So it affects everybody. So you're right on with that. And I speak a lot in that way, just so people can connect with what I'm trying to talk about when you then get into something like, okay, let's design and talk about the solar array on this, 50,000 square foot building. But start with something super simple.
Well, like you said, find common ground and work from there.
Yeah, totally.
So you mentioned solar array. So what is your current endeavor?
My business is Solar Advisory, and my mission here in North Texas is to serve as a trusted, unbiased advisor to North Texas organizations to help them implement, deploy tailored best of breed solar solutions. So, as I said earlier, solar is very flexible, very scalable, very adaptable. So there's not a one size fits all. And so the way I work in this business at Solar Advisory is to engage with organizations, understand what they know about solar, what they're thinking about, what is their sustainability strategy. Pick your favorite current acronym like CSR, corporate social responsibility, or ESG is the hot one now, environmental social governance, or the old one of
Correct.
socially responsible investing, whatever it is. What is their thing there? What are they trying to accomplish? How far down that road are they? How important is it to their business, to their brand? And then use that as a way, again, to connect and plug into something they're already doing and then help them go further and faster down that path by doing something like putting solar on the rooftop of their office building or on top of a warehouse or a manufacturing facility, whatever, wherever you've got a nice big flat roof that's frankly doing nothing but protecting you from weather. So a great value opportunity to do more with that roof over your head.
So you mentioned organizations. Are you working more on the commercial side, industrial side, residential? Any specific?
Yeah, good question. Commercial and industrial, a little bit with nonprofits as well, because I've been involved with lots of community service around Dallas, North Texas in my life. So I would love to serve and help nonprofits. But I'm not doing any residential, but there's loads of people around here doing residential projects. And we're seeing that market go pretty well here. But commercial industrial is, as I said, still pretty early, a lot of education advocacy and getting people up to speed, but a lot of fun projects going on that are anywhere from, $150,000, $200,000 type projects up to $10 million projects. All in there is what I'm currently working on as I look at my whiteboard of prospective clients over here.
And so let's say, for example, you talked about the different sizes. If a company was interested, you could essentially walk them through the entire, financial modeling, installation, et cetera.
Yes, exactly. And I also tell people up front, I said, this is not super complicated and it won't take a lot of your time, but you've got to make your own decision that you'll want to do this. And I can help companies then see that, wow, if we want to do this, we can defend it, back it up, or even make the case that we should because it makes really good financial sense. And then once, in a new market, you've always got to start with the numbers and the business case and appeal to that. And then you can blend in the desire and the brand and the qualitative measures. And then really engineering a solar project on a given typical flat commercial or industrial rooftop, engineering that and building it, that's not very complicated. It's really not, especially as long as you make sure you have a good site, meaning a good roof that's in good shape or new. It's pretty straightforward. And so that's the problem. And as I like to tell people, I stay along and advise and herd the cats through that entire process so it gets done as efficiently as possible. And at the end of that, then I'll bring the barbecue and the lemonade and we'll have a party and celebrate their solar power being generated.
You mentioned something earlier about the hail that we have in North Texas and how these roofs or how the solar panels can, withstand some of that. And I think you mentioned that they've shown in lab tests that it can withstand, some of the hail that we get in this area.
Oh, definitely. The stuff that's still pretty brutal but reasonable hail, meaning less than a golf ball size, because the testing that the solar module manufacturers make around the world is where they basically shoot a very large ball bearing across a room directly at a solar panel at a high speed, and it bounces off and falls on the floor. The solar panel's fine. Now, if you get baseball and softball sized hail, I always say, I don't care what you're talking about. You're going to call your insurance man, your insurance agent, because nothing survives that. And I have firsthand experience with that, as many North Texans do. So at that point, it's an insurance claim, but that's rare. That's very rare. And I would say, why not make a business decision because of that rare meteorological event? Because most of the time, this is going to give you great value and last for 25, 30 years. Because another related tidbit to the durability is that warranties on solar modules, solar panels, are typically 25 years, 20 to 25 years, which blows most people away. What have you ever heard of? What have you ever purchased yourself? We had a warranty on that product for 25 years.
Right. You often hear about 25-year roof warranties, but the company's on around.
Well, that's true. And who knows who is around in 25 years. So part of this as well is that the language in our industry and others is the bankable solar providers that either will be around or they're going to continue to be successful. They might be acquired, they might merge. Something could happen, but their technology, their business may or may not live on. But you'll be taken care of long term. But the other thing about that is, my bet is what's going to happen, and we're pretty early in the solar market to see this in any significant way yet, is that it'll be much shorter. Let's say somewhere between 8 and 15 years. I don't know when the business decision will be, hey, look at the technology. It's twice as productive and efficient as it used to be. It's now even more, it's now cut in cost another 50%. So it's half as expensive, twice as productive. For business and financial reasons, let's replace the system we have. Let's not wait till it, if you will, is end of useful life in 25, 30 years, which outlasts most people in a single company. And the executives will be different anyway, but it'll be a smart business decision to do that. And then you implement new technology, perhaps take the old technology like we've done in the computing industry and have a whole middle market of reuse, taking materials out and recycling of it instead of throwing it away. So I think there's a whole middle market in solar that's going to develop for reusing or perhaps giving them to nonprofits and or schools or charities that doesn't exist today, just like we have with old computing and electronics and related technology.
Well, that led into my next question. I had a conversation this morning with a lady, and that was one of the things she was speaking about, is that in 15, 20, 25 years, when, these panels are no longer as efficient as they are today, what does the recycling look like? So perhaps you can, shed some light on that.
Well, I can only speculate on it. I've not been very closely connected to that part of the market. I think so far it's
Mm-hmm.
super small because of what we've already touched on, which is that if you've already installed a solar system, even if it's 10 years ago, it's probably still working as expected. Thus, it's
Mm-hmm.
benign. It's not become some sort of maintenance nightmare. Again, I always like to draw the distinction. If you've got a 10-year-old piece of computing technology that you're using, that's probably really painful and really expensive. But the good thing about solar is, yes, it's 10 years old, but if you think about the inputs to it and how it works, as long as it's still got sunshine, it's going to perform. And the sunshine in any given place doesn't change dramatically over years and decades. It might change season to season, year to year a little bit, but so it's going to still be rocking along, doing its job. And so point is, to your question, I don't personally have much experience, nor have I seen a great deal yet about this recycling, reuse market that certainly will develop, because there'll be a lot of money to be made there. And there'll be some high value in that, just again, like in electronics and computing technology. So it's a great question. Let's talk about that when we do a podcast in 5 more years.
I would love to. Actually, there was an article recently about this. You mentioned, secondary market of companies that are now recycling some of the wind turbines. I don't know if you caught that or
Mm-hmm.
not, but they're taking down these huge blades and they're essentially grinding them, shredding them, and there's this sub industry, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. So they're in the wind industry, great example of that. And that's just the nature of innovative technology, innovative capitalism, innovative research and development that will never stop. Wind turbines, for instance, are dramatically more productive, much higher output now than when I first started looking and researching and understanding them out in West Texas, where they took off, 15 years ago. Same thing, again, with computing technology, where what I think is going to happen, not so much with the current silicon type photovoltaic panels we have, but probably we'll see that we'll have new materials that are how solar modules are constructed in the future, because they'll be more productive, because it'll do better than current silicon type technology that we have. So that's an area that if you're a young person, an engineer in college, or just out, materials science, I think, is a really exciting field for that applies directly to advances in technologies like solar, because it will change. But I don't know what it'll be and how long it'll take it to get significant market share and take over. But those things very likely will occur. And other smart, prognosticators say those things. I'm just parroting what I've heard about that, but it all makes sense.
I absolutely agree. We were fortunate enough here at our company to have a meeting last month with a gentleman that's using perovskite
Mm-hmm.
and is doing a roll to roll. And, he says that his procedure, his process, if you will, is much faster and less, capital intensive than traditional solar panels. So to your point, absolutely, these technologies are coming right along.
Yeah, perovskite is kind of the current hot example of that next material, and the question will be who seizes upon that and can get it to market and scale it such that it becomes a real factor in the market. So again, that's another thing that's motivating for me about this, because having been through my life in the technology, the computing technology world, where I had to be used to and accepting of and expecting of all these changes. Same thing here. This is exciting, fun stuff. So it's just going to get better, and I like better.
Well, Michael, from the mountains to the sun, if there's one piece of advice you'd like to share with the audience, what would it be?
Oh boy, I've touched on it before, and it would be to figure out what for you is really inherently, intrinsically rewarding, that feeds your need for purpose and impact, because then you'll find yourself doing things on a daily basis, whether it's your work or any other endeavor, that is just self-motivating. And then hopefully if the reward from that and the impact of that goes beyond you into your community, into your customers, into your family, your friends, whomever it is, whatever it is, then that's what allows us, at least in my view, to get up every day, put our feet on the floor, march out the door, and go do whatever it is we're doing, because we're motivated and being driven by things that matter to us. And it can be very individual. And so, with my kids, I've always tried to just help them figure that out and find their purpose at this early stage of their lives. And it probably will change for, any of them. That's great. That's exciting too, because change is also super good and healthy, as evidenced by I'm having as much fun as ever in what I do now as I did earlier in my career in a different industry.
You're echoing another conversation I had today, where a gentleman said that if you find meaning in what you're doing, you're more likely to be excellent at it.
Well, I love the meaning in what I'm doing. I'm trying real hard to be excellent at it. So
Well,
thank you.
I think you're doing a wonderful job, Michael, and I really, really appreciate you being a guest on Bigger Than Us today. And I look forward to catching up with you in 5 years.
Well, good. Well, maybe even sooner, Raj, but I'm delighted to have been here today. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you and have a wonderful
You're
afternoon.
welcome. Bye.